This is an interview with Francis Lucille in Temecula, California, on Thanksgiving Day, November 28th, 2024. Francis, thank you very much for being gracious enough to have a conversation with me. My research project is a study of the modern non-dual spirituality movement, and you are one of the very important voices in what I'm designating or calling this movement. And in a way, I'd like to ask you some kind of classic questions about your teachings that I'm sure you've talked about at various points in the course of your teaching career. But I would like to hear them from you firsthand to ensure that what I have to say about them or how I present them in whatever I write is hopefully accurate. And so if I can jump right into things, you have obviously been a seeker for some time in the past until you came upon the realization, the transformative realization that I guess would say is liberating and so on. And you are probably familiar with a lot of other non-dual teachers. Would you say that the vast crop of non-dual teachers are roughly pointing to the same truth, or are some types of teachings misleading to the avid seeker?
I am in the wrong position to know about other teachers, because I knew about my teacher, and a few of his friends who were teachers, such as Walter Kiers, Wei Wu Wei, to whom he introduced me as a friend, but I don't know the other teachers. I know people who have been my students and who teach, yes, but other than that, I'm in the wrong place. Mm-hmm. Because I've not attended any teachings. Mm-hmm. The moment I met my teacher, basically that was it. After 1 year after the first meeting, I've not seen anybody else.
Wow, that's very interesting. Okay, so I have found in my work and research on teachers of non-duality that there seems to be a distinction between those who emphasize the so-called Atman doctrine, if you like, that there is one whole absolute reality, and others who seem to defer and not point to some absolute, but point constantly to the relative. In academic circles, it's probably the distinction between a kind of a Buddhist position and a Vedanta position, the Anatman versus the Anatman doctrine. Do you see them as essentially just taking different approaches pointing to the same reality, one by default saying, I'm not going to say it is, and the other saying, look, I'm going to say this is, or I am, versus...
What is the debate between the Anatman doctrine and Shankaracharya? I think Shankara just won this debate, and this aspect of Buddhism that negates an ultimate reality experienced as consciousness is not in fact in line neither with the teaching of the Buddha or with the teachings, for instance, of the patriarchs of Zen. Mm-hmm. Because what is it that they call our original face, or our Buddha nature. What is it, if not Atman? You see? Or the body, right? So this seems to me as a kind of a religious misinterpretation of the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddhism was introduced to China early on, right, and developed, as you know, what was known as the School of the South, with a lot of monasteries and a lot of debates about the scriptures, where they were kind of splitting hairs among monks. But the original message, the transmission, had been lost. And that's when Bodhidharma crossed the Himalaya, reached China from the north, and started teaching there, and that became the school of the north, which became the Zen. And it was about a direct transmission independent from the scriptures, right? So, and that was the authentic, that was the Buddhism was reborn by this appearance of a true sage from that tradition in the north of China. So this debate fever that was prevalent in China, the same thing was happening, you know, in India between Shankaracharya and the Buddhists of that period.
Okay. My next question pertains more to a kind of issue that keeps arising concerning the relationship between morality and realization. Is a moral foundation necessary for realization to occur? And, or does morality result as a product of realization? Or is morality something irrelevant to the realization of the noumenal reality, or whatever you would like to call it?
The higher level of morality naturally flows from selflessness. And to the extent that a truth seeker is authentic, he or she is seeking the truth about consciousness, which implies the willingness to liberate oneself from the selfishness. So at the very undertaking, there is already the seed of morality. And in fact, it is the same morality which was at the beginning that then flourishes and finds its full extension with the discovery of the impersonal reality of consciousness. And another beauty of non-duality, actually, is that most philosophies have a problem deriving ethics from ontology. There is always something in ethics that refers either to a tradition, and we never know how it started, or to a revelation of laws, right, like the Ten Commandments, or the model of a sage, the sage like Jesus being used as a model to which we should conform in our life. So these are the source of ethics. More rarely there is the claim of a natural ethics, but it never worked really, because the natural instinct of man as an animal, this side of it, doesn't really correspond to what we call ethics nowadays. In contradistinction with this, non-duality, which is the experience that there is only one reality, naturally leads to ethical behavior. This ethical behavior cannot be predefined in a rule book, although in most cases it will conform to the most of the ethical rules and societal rules, but it has to be determined on a case-by-case basis, depending upon the context, depending upon the decision that has to be made, and the rule is to make this decision from a vantage point according to which there is only one reality. So, for instance, in the interaction between two people, the decision has to be made according to a principle according to which you are me, I am you. You see? And that's beautiful, because the ethic is not predefined in the book of rules, but it is dynamically discovered from moment to moment.
So an outside observer looking at a person's behavior might be unable to discern if one is acting from this place of moral connectedness, because they may be applying some kind of moral code or something like this that is a social convention, cultural aspect, onto the behavior of someone else.
But in most cases, however, it will conform.
It probably will conform.
And also because the society in which we live in, with its culture, with its tradition, is also part of the context. So that the ethical decision will be to some extent dependent on
the cultural context
in which it has to be made.
Right, because the person's typically acting holistically on the reality that they are a part of, not pretending that it doesn't exist.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that's like that. From your perspective and understanding, what are the markers of true realization that distinguish it from a partial or a false realization on the part of the seeker? So sometimes seekers might think, I've got it now, and then it falls away or something like this. But for the person who has fully realized in a deep and abiding way, are there some characteristics that seem to belong to such realization that the seeker doesn't have, for instance?
Well, on a first-person basis, it would be it could be described by very rare occurrences of the belief to be, or the feeling to be, a separate entity. And in other words, if asked point blank, what are you? The question that will come will never be, I'm this human being, and this, no, I'm really something else. Now, from a third person perspective, observation, In many cases, the behavior will be similar because impersonal action, love, for instance, is not is not solely the domain of the sage.
Mm.
All human beings are potentially able to act in an impersonal manner. And they do. They experience love, they experience integrity, they experience beauty. The difference, if you will, is that when that happens, the sense of being separate has not been eradicated. It simply went for a siesta. And then it will come back later, so there will be this alternance of impersonal behavior and psychological suffering. The sage Ksemaraja in the Kashmirian Shaivism tradition said, in the moment one liberates oneself, in the moment one binds oneself. There are no guarantees at the level of the human body-mind, because the human body-mind is not getting enlightened.
No.
The self, on the other hand, is not getting enlightened, right? The body-mind gets transformed through a multiplicity of glimpses of our true nature, which we could call enlightenment.
So wouldn't you say, though, that the seeking comes to an end?
Yes,
because
the seeking comes to an end in a very, very natural way, in the same manner that the flame of the candle comes to an end when all the fuel has been
gone.
burned. Yes.
What about the fear of non-existence?
Fear of non-existence, fear of absolute disappearance is a hallmark of ignorance. Because it is only when we believe to be a fragment, any fragment is impermanent. And then there is a deep knowing in all beings of our eternity, of our reality. And there is a conflict between this belief to be separate and mortal, and this deep knowingness, if you will, of being the totality and as such eternal. That manifests as existential fear. The realization of our true nature puts an end to this conflict.
I mean, that kind of ties to my next question, which is that fear, that existential fear. Would you say that's one of the primary obstacles, a hurdle that the seeker has to confront? Because quite often the dissolution of the separate self is envisioned as losing oneself into death or insanity, or
Yes.
it's a huge fear to have to.
These are resistances. It is simply the way ignorance maintains itself. Ignorance is a dynamism. Ignorance is not an object. In order to perpetuate itself, it has to stay in motion. Because it is the identification with something which is impermanent. And because impermanent things such as thoughts don't last, this identification with the thought, at the end of the thought, has to find another object to
Very creatively.
identify with. Yes, yes. And so there is a fear. You can see that. I remember I had a boss, and he asked me a question, technical question, and I was taking my time to answer, thinking. And then he got impatient. And aggravated. And he went, "What are you thinking? What are you doing?" With aggression, because my silence was kind of awakening his own demons.
Oh, yes. Nice. So, I mean, it's beautiful because every one of your answers is sort of segueing into my next question. So, in a way, if everything is as it is, what is the problem with ignorance?
From the vantage point of wisdom, there is no problem with ignorance.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And so, in other words, I'm not a missionary trying to convert, to save the souls, because there is only one soul who doesn't need to be saved. So it's simply the game this reality plays. So from the vantage point of wisdom, ignorance is not a problem. So from the vantage point of wisdom, it's just, why am I doing that? You could ask. It's like, why am I singing in the shower? Why is the bird singing? Or why is a poet writing his poet? Or why is a musician playing? And the bird in the forest who is singing his song doesn't care whether one person or one animal is listening to him or whether the entire forest is. It's
Okay, this is a more kind of, maybe it's a bit scholarly. Lineage. Is lineage important in the whole drama of teacher-seeker realization? Many seekers, I have found, hang on to a guru in the hopes of having the mantle passed to them, having their realization officially sanctioned, kind of like, Huineng and so on. We see this, of course, in the Zen, and we see this in the Advaita traditions and so on. But how significant and important do you think that is? In terms of authenticity, I suppose there's a quality of importance.
We have to make distinctions here, because you were referring to Huineng, the six patriarchs of Zen and the tradition there. We have to understand that in these monasteries, only a few were ready for the non-dual path. A lot of people will come there with a spiritual endeavor and be taught meditation, mantra, etc. And it was a community. And the successor of the head monk, it was required for him, of course, to be wise, but it was not the only requirement. He needed to have leadership qualities, intelligence in the ordinary sense, managerial qualities. So then it would make sense that the head monk, towards the end of his tenure, would choose the person he felt the best qualified to fulfill all of these functions. But it is very clear also that in the Zen tradition that many sages were not designated by their guru. They were visiting, right? They stayed for a while, but they didn't become the head of the monastery. So this distinction has to be made. Second distinction that has to be made is the Indian tradition, for instance, and in which a trade is transmitted through the family, from father to son. I remember my teacher mentioning that when Atmananda Krishna Menon passed away, there was this top student, Levi, who was kind of, everybody expected that it would be the designated one, but instead he designated his son. You know. But it is a different function of the guru. It is the Indian function of the guru. Perform rites, to be a Brahmin, etc. It's a different thing. It's a different thing. Now, regarding lineage, what is really transmitted is transmitted or is not transmitted. You see. And then it doesn't need the recognition, any recognition, because this recognition speaks for itself. And this designation of the successor would be as ridiculous, if you will, as a student in mathematics, finishing a course on partial derivative equations or theory of distributions, successfully, having understood everything, that this guy will be prevented from even talking or sharing his understanding with others, or doing some teaching assistantship. You see what I can see that you're not very comfortable.
I think the sun, can I just, my mic, is this good if I'm just moving a bit in here? Because the sun was just...
And either you get it or you don't. If you don't get it, there is no point. Then what happens in the case in point is that you create a religion. The religion is created by the ones who didn't get it. But you create a religion. If you get it, it's yours. Especially because it refers to yourself.
Absolutely.
It's yours. You don't need any... that reminds me of another Zen story. There was this Zen student, and he had this glimpse. And he immediately asked for a private meeting with a teacher, and describes what happens, was expecting for the teacher to validate. And the teacher said, no, that's not Satori. Go back to the kitchen. So the guy goes back to the kitchen, but this experience he had still. And he asked, after 3 months, he asked for a second meeting. Because the teacher, are you sure it's not Satori? Of course I'm sure. Go back to the kitchen. 3 months pass, and then he asked for a third meeting with the teacher. And Mark explains and says, are you absolutely sure it's not Satori? The teacher says, what are you coming back? I already told you twice. Of course it's not Satori. And then the student says, you know what? Keep your Satori. I keep my experience. And then the teacher goes, Satori.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's...
So yes, it has to come from wisdom. And then it cannot come from...
So it needs not the validation.
No.
Because...
The proof is in the pudding.
So then the pursuit of this that you sometimes see, because there's often, in India there seems to be a very strong tradition of making sure that your guru was someone and they told you this and that the thing is handed, otherwise your teachings are illegitimate and they have nothing. And I mean, I suppose it doesn't matter for the true seeker because in this example of your story, 1,000 voices can tell you you don't have it, but if you know that you do, then...
Yeah, what are the three forms in India? Direct experience, the shruti, the written word, and the third one is quite...
Oh, smriti, shruti, and...
yeah. So they seem to be put on the same level. They are not.
No.
Because the only one that matters is the direct experience. All the other forms of approach are just a vehicle to the direct experience.
Nice. I was wondering what I asked myself to ask you here. So is there an evolutionary vector of self-realization, or does it seem to be solely ontologically creative? I think what I'm trying to ask here is, some teachers seem to feel that realization for various people has some kind of an end goal, that is ultimately more people will become awakened, and there's a kind of a spiritual evolution afoot. Or is it just something that is perennially creative moment to moment with no trajectory towards some greater... what's that?
A la Aurobindo.
A la Aurobindo, exactly. The entering and so on. Yeah.
It's evolutionary,
Yeah.
or we had in Europe this monk, Teilhard de Chardin, who was talking about the point omega, this convergence. Well, it may or may not be the case. I've not been privy to any information about the ultimate destiny of mankind, and I really don't care, because ultimately the goal of this world, the goal of this life as a human being in this world, is not in this world. This life in this world are, in fact, vehicles to take us beyond this body, beyond this world. You see? So there is nothing to be expected of value within this world or its future evolution. This world is simply a vehicle to take us to our true nature and also to celebrate, just as all the beings, sentient beings in this world, in fact, they celebrate the Lord, they celebrate their true nature.
Excellent. This is me just being a bit of a rascal, I hope. Not knowing seems to be the fundamental realization in some sense. It is a kind of a knowing, but mostly knowing seems to come into the realm of the phenomenal as opposed to the noumenal. So why do we have so many words to say about the nature of the noumenal? When one is only able to speak of the phenomenal, through the phenomenal and with...
Yes. In fact, the words are used in the teaching in two ways. A lot of the words being used are accomplishing a deconstruction. It's the deconstruction of belief systems down to their foundation, showing that they are built on sand. it is fair game to use logic to operate the deconstruction. In other words, because the entire building has been built using the tool of logic, it can be deconstructed using the same tool.
Using the thorn to remove the thorn.
Yeah. It doesn't mean, by the way, that any specific form of logic, such as our Boolean logic or excluded middle logic, has to be preferred or occupies a central position in the truth. We don't have to choose a specific logic. It may very well be that the Boolean logic is very well adapted to our human scale, to the world, and we have created it to function in this world. On different scales, for instance, at the quantum scale, this logic doesn't apply any longer. So there is nothing universal about logic. But from the vantage point of teaching, to operate this deconstruction of the belief of separation, of the belief of duality, it's fair game to use logic. So that's the first way the words are used. This use of the words take us to the threshold, but not beyond the threshold. They take us to a state of not knowing in which we recognize, oh yes, I thought I knew. I don't. And then there is an openness. And the second use of the words cannot be predetermined. It is poetic in the sense of creative, because it comes from the source itself, and it has this power in this moment of openness to take the student through the threshold. So the deconstruction pushes him or her to the threshold, and then the poetic, in the moment itself, triggers the final step, which is a non-step. And I think that's what is referred to in the Indian tradition by the use of the Mahavakyas. Yes, the Tattvamasi, for instance. It's not something that the teacher would say like that. You see what I mean? But when said
at the right
at the perfect
time.
moment, it's a kind of Zen thing, at the perfect moment, then he creates. But even that to limit, this creativity, this poetry to simply 4 Mahavakyas. You see what the teaching has more freedom to it, you see? But there is this quality, and also that which can operate this glimpse. It's not necessarily words. It can be the tone of the voice. It can be a gesture. It can be just a silence.
Nice. Okay, we've got after realization, what is the point of practice? Does practice make any sense? What is there to improve other than the phenomenal self?
It depends what we call realization. And so I will answer to your question differently. After a glimpse, which is moksha, which is liberation. After a glimpse, moksha, liberation. Jivan mukti. No? The belief to be a separate entity has been eradicated and barely survives, in agony. And there is still a sadhana after that. The difference between the sadhana after the glimpse and the sadhana before the glimpse is that in the sadhana before the glimpse, we believe to be a seeker, seeking enlightenment for himself or for herself as the super gift, the super personal achievement. After the glimpse, that is no longer the case. After the glimpse, it is simply a kind of activity by this body mind which cooperates with the universe to liberate itself, the body mind, from the leftovers of ignorance. It's a purification. In the Kashmir and Shaivis tradition, there is a Trika tradition, right? And it's described as three paths: the path of the individual, the path of the energy, and the path of Shiva. The path of the individual corresponds to the path to the past, if you will, which the belief to be a separate entity has not been touched. The path of the energy corresponds to the post-glimpse sadhana, in which there is nobody, knowingly nobody traveling on this path. That's nobody traveling on this path, but the person, apparently the person may be sitting in meditation, maybe doing yoga, maybe reading books, maybe attending satsangs, But at the same time, there is nobody there. It's a joyful cooperation. And even this type of activities at some point comes to an end and blends into the path of Shiva. And in fact, even this description itself is limiting, because regarding at least the path of the energy and the path of Shiva, it is not like we travel on the path of the energy and then all of a sudden that's no longer the case of Shiva. No, but there is oscillation between the two, you see, and each glimpse triggers a return to the path of Shiva, and then a return to the path of Shiva. So it's just that this getting established on the path of Shiva, which is not a path, of course, which is simply life, incrementally, through a repetition of glimpses, gets accomplished.
At the end, if there is such a thing, there is not a distinction between the doing and the... Because there is no goal to achieve in this.
Something we have to be careful about is to see the realized teacher or human being as Superman, as someone who never makes mistakes, someone who is always perfectly impersonal. No. There are no guarantees there in this business.
Absolutely.
We are all human. You see, we all have human frailties. We all have human flaws. You see, it's that is the religious side that doesn't understand that. That idealizes the teacher, especially after he's dead. And then
he has less problems then.
because then, and then each year after his death, he gets upgraded to the next level. So can you imagine that after 2,000 years, it's weird, very different from the common of the mortals here.
One doesn't entertain this idea of actually improving the relative self vis-a-vis. I mean, I suppose after realization, you could certainly go and do yoga or run or something to get the physical body in shape and eat well and all the rest of it, but this is not tied to your realization.
You can, but because there are other advantages. Meditation is natural. You are always, I had people who are asking my teacher, do you meditate? He said, what?
Why would you?
I'm always in meditation.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, he could sit in silence, quite often.
Mm-hmm.
But for him, there is no distinction between a state of meditating. There is a distinction between sitting and standing, for instance, between speaking and not speaking, between thinking and being more available.
It's sort of like Dogen's saying about you don't sit, you don't do zazen to become a Buddha, but to manifest your Buddha nature.
Yes.
It's not a means to an end, just the expression of this or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Regarding actually something else regarding this aspect of perfection of the teacher, there is this Zen also a story in which the master is asked, "Do you see your Buddha nature?" And the answer is, "I see my own mistakes."
Very good.
Because it is from the vantage point of truth, of love, of beauty, that we can see the mistakes.
Otherwise, how could there be any compassion? Except as a memory, which is not a living truth. So then, okay, I'm done with my questions, and it's totally wonderful. What purpose does the teacher serve? Because I remember watching something, you distinguish between a kind of a upaguru and a karana guru and so on, at one level. But you've talked about the value of the teacher, but how, sometimes I think teaching is like, the line, selling water by the river. It's there for everyone. It's,
I think it's a question of vocation. Nothing happens by chance.
Yeah, that's true.
And certainly it's a mistake to think that if someone is liberated from ignorance or whatever that
You automatically would want to become a teacher, yeah.
to teach, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah. So I'm very glad, I'm over, but I'm very glad that you are, and that you have spent a lifetime teaching others. It's been an absolute delight. I've been enjoying this retreat so much, to be in your company and with the company of the fellow people here. Yes, it's all, and this beautiful house, my God, this is so lovely, and the location.
It's also something that it's not about the teacher, it's about us. We have been gathered here. You see, it's beautiful, it's a happening, and I remember when I was, sometimes the thought would come to me, this quality, In the beginning of a retreat, people are a little, finding their... And I was, is it going to happen again? The magic. The magic. It's never the case that it
doesn't
happen.
Yeah.
That's,
Wonderful. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.